Hey, what's going on, roleplayers? It's the Bard here, and today we're revisiting one of horror's most iconic games to grace our gaming table. That's right, we're going back to Call of Cthulhu. So it's amazing to be coming back to Call of Cthulhu again after all these months, and I'm really excited for this one because I've got some great feedback from some of the viewers. And today's video is really concentrating on this one specific comment that has just got a lot of questions built into it, and I think it could really be of value to a lot of you guys out there as well. So here we go. I'm a long-time D&D and recently became intrigued with Lovecraft and Cthulhu. With such a huge difference between the game and systems though, I'm a bit intimidated by the amount of story and talking versus action and combat. I feel like the game would really separate the wheat from the chaff in regards to a truly good game master. With D&D, an average or even poor DM can simply crank up the combat to divert from a poor story and the players will stay occupied and engaged. Well, first of all, thanks for that comment. I really got a lot out of that. It made me feel really good. I'm glad you got something from the video. It really does mean a lot to me. Second of all, this really got me thinking what it's like to be a new player in a new game. Now, it's very easy for me to say, you could try this and you can do these tips and tricks and you can add this to your game to try to make it good. But it's very difficult to look at a perspective of being brand new to something. I think it's something in the way this comment is worded that really struck a chord with me. See, when I make these videos, I come at it from a position where Cthulhu has always been something that I've had with me near enough since the beginning. So it's a very odd experience for me to turn around and try to perceive what it's like for someone who's new. And I think that's something that's very prevalent in any game that people who have already got experience in. We share all our knowledge, but we don't empathize with how difficult it is when you're starting. So let's explore that a little bit as well. So I started role-playing in the early 90s. I started with D&D myself, so I can completely understand where you're coming from. To go from being the hero to being in high fantasy, really cliche environments, magic, power, influence, to go from that to being nothing, it's a big shock to the system. It really is. It's a shock not just for the players but for the GM as well. What tends to happen is that in high fantasy games you really feel powerful, and then games like Call of Cthulhu come along and they really show your mortality. Call of Cthulhu is really good because it really shows the inherent frailty of life. I can understand exactly where you're coming from when you say you feel a little bit intimidated by it, and I have no doubt that many other new storytellers have that exact same feeling. And you're so lucky. You're so lucky and you don't even know. Because when you become comfortable running Call of Cthulhu, you will never get that feeling back. The feelings that Call of Cthulhu inspire in a player is fear and horror. And what is the essence of fear and horror? At its core, at its fundamental, it is the not knowing. The fear of the not knowing. And when you're a new storyteller and you don't know what's going to happen, yeah, you feel intimidated, and yeah, you feel a little bit fearful of what might happen. And you need to embrace every moment of that because it will not last. Because you'll learn your players' play styles. They will start to learn your gaming style. And eventually, yes, you can still invoke the feelings if you're good enough, but you will never, ever get the same rush that you do when you have your first few games of Call of Cthulhu. And that is a fact. And I can tell you from experience, that is a fact. Sorry guys, I just listened to that back, and it's a bit intense, even for me. Still, the points within it are valid, so I'm going to leave it in anyway. So my friend, you are absolutely correct in your assertion of this game separating the wheat from the chaff when it comes to storytelling. In fact, this is probably one of the most story-intense games you'll ever play. I mean, in my top 3 favourites are D&D, Vampire, and Call of Cthulhu. And each one of them for their own reasons, because D&D is quest-driven, Vampire is character-driven, and Cthulhu is story-driven. So this is true for every gamer and every GM, and it has to be addressed. And it's the great gaming paradox, and it is particularly for Call of Cthulhu. In fact, the The essence of Cthulhu is paradox, and I think that's probably why it's one of the most iconic and best loved games out there, because you naturally have to deal with concepts that are counter to each other. So yes, as you say, the story needs to be there, but at the same time, what you really just need is the clues, okay, and the setting, and the correct immersion. Because what will happen is the players will follow clues and they will follow their leads. And yes, it's very talky based, but there's nothing more satisfying than solving a riddle or solving a clue or finding an answer. And there's a great amount of achievement and a great sense of victory in that. So don't stress too much about how talky the game is. As long as all the clues fit neatly together and they actually lead to the thing you need them to lead to, that is the most important thing. Because what's going to happen is those players are going to follow those clues and they're going to go off on whatever tangent they want, and they will talk and they will discuss and they will have different ideas and they will want to explore different avenues. And you won't, once it's like once it gets going, it's like a perpetual motion thing. It just builds and it builds and it builds and it doesn't stop until they find the answer. I mean, I take a great deal of enjoyment in fixing things, and a clue to a riddle or to a puzzle or to a mystery is just like a piece of something that needs to be fixed. And I think there's a great sense of achievement in that. So when you put the clues in, the players will naturally follow those threads to an inevitable conclusion. And even if they follow it in the wrong direction, it can sometimes be a better story than you actually had written for yourself anyway. And as session by session by session goes past, if you're an adaptable storyteller, then you can come up with maybe something better than you originally had planned. And it's part of the paradox. You want the players to be immersed and you want them to feel like they are succeeding in some way, but in Call of Cthulhu, you never want to give them too much, and you never want to have a truly happy ending, as we've already discussed. I mean, particularly in Call of Cthulhu, finding the answer isn't always the best thing. In fact, it can often lead to something far more dangerous or far more, fear-inducing, or just plain character loss or character sanity loss. And it will. Finding the answers is one of the most dangerous things. The more you learn, the less you realize you know. The more you want to discover, the greater the fear of losing yourself is. I mean, let's be fair. No one's ever heard of the great hero of Dunwich or the legendary investigator of Innsmouth. The best you can hope for is to come out of it with your sanity still intact and your credibility still intact as well. After that, it's usually death, insanity, or some unknown worse fate. From the perspective of running the game as well, it is also still a great paradox, especially in those first few nights when you start playing, because you want to immerse yourself in the fear yourself. So if you are dubious about the unknown, you want to immerse yourself and understand what that feels like so that you can then harness it and then invoke it better in the future. But at the same time, you can have no fear. You can't have any fear, especially in front of your players. You have to own the table. You have to be in complete command of everything that's going on. Otherwise, your players will sense it. It's like blood in the water, and they are hungry sharks. Because they're hungry sharks. They want the story. That's why they're there. They're there to have some kind of entertainment, but they want to be engaged in some way. And they will, at best, not enjoy the story if, you're floundering. At worst, they will tear you down. I mean, it's not something that usually happens amongst friends, but it's something I have seen happen. So just be careful. This is all I can say. Just make sure you're planned out and you have full command of the table. In fact, I did hear once that in order to be successful, one must project an image of success, and it's true in gaming as well, and particularly in Call of Cthulhu. You must project this image of success and this constant command of your table. And you want to keep the players immersed because you can't break the horror. You can have breaks, okay? And this is something I would really recommend. If you're playing a horror game, be it Call of Cthulhu or say like Vampire or something like that, make sure you immerse yourself completely. You don't want distractions in Call of Cthulhu. You don't want people on their phone. You don't want people making jokes. Set the standard immediately. Make sure people know that they are there to game and that you have put a lot of effort into writing this game. So you want them to really understand the full scope of it. They will get a much better experience, and so will you. So in saying that, make sure you have regular breaks within your game, because people will get frustrated. Sometimes they do get a bit fidgety when they're sitting down for a long time. So make sure you have regular intervals where you can break, have something to eat, have a drink, cool off, make phone calls or whatever they need to do. Keep that separate from the game. Whatever it takes to make that happen, make sure you do it. It distracts so much from the game when people are fidgeting around and doing other things at the table. Have a rule. If, I don't know, the book is open, then it's game on. No, nothing else matters. That could be a great way to do it. It seems a bit totalitarian, but you have to do it this way. You can't mess around with it. So death comes to all. The only question is when and how. So when it comes to combat, as I've seen you mention, even in a game like D&D, combat for the sake of combat isn't going to get anywhere. I mean, it can divert a little bit from a story, yes, and they will stay occupied, but even combat has to be thought out. Each encounter needs to be thought out. If someone gave you the key to a sealed crypt, and you went down there, and then you had to do battle with bandits or another group of adventurers, it wouldn't make any sense, because how did they get in there? Now, it could be a little mystery in and of itself that they were in there. Perhaps they found another way in, perhaps they tunneled through the walls or something, but you would have to explain that away. Normally, the only thing you'd find down there would be undead and constructs. Even an encounter has to be thought out. And when it comes to Call of Cthulhu, combat encounters have to be thought out, and they have to be meticulous, because this is a game where you will die. There is no two ways about it. If you don't approach a combat with absolute precision and absolute flawless tactics, someone is going to be either badly injured or they are going to die. There's nothing more that can be said. The game is brutal because you are just an average Joe who has been put into a situation that they probably can't handle. That being said, however, I always see people putting points into firearms. Always. And yes, it's useful. It's useful if you're up against other people. But that's its only use. You'll soon realise that there's only 2, maybe 3 uses for a gun in the game. One is to shoot back at the people who are shooting at you. The reason they're shooting at you is because you're a threat. And if you're a threat to them, they'll try to shoot you. So therefore, you should shoot them back. Second of all is to shoot yourself, because you don't want to be dragged off to whatever dark hole that monster crawled out of. It's probably worse than insanity. And even insanity is a reason enough to put a bullet in yourself. And the final use is to shoot someone else who isn't a threat. But, and this is cruel as, but that is the nature of the game, you shoot someone in the leg, slow them down enough so that the creature will get them first and giving you the chance to get away. Horrible tactic, I know, and it's not one you want to pull off on another player if it can be avoided. But if there's an NPC that you don't really need anymore, yeah, he's getting one in the leg. So where games like D&D and Call of Cthulhu differ is that when you go into a combat in D&D, a lot of people are just looking at it as a big pool of experience waiting to be harvested. A fight to get through, to feel powerful, to get closer to that next level and your next set of abilities. Call of Cthulhu is the exact opposite. It's always a fight for survival. Now, yes, you can have hard fights in D&D, but you're not going to get the same intensity. Combat in this game should be a story enhancer. It shouldn't be a substitute for story. I mean, combat really should never be a substitute for story. And I can see that you already understand this concept. Combat isn't something you can put in just to keep the players interested. Because when you get a combat, someone's really going to get hurt. There's no magic, there's no healing. There's no sleeping it off in a day. These wounds take weeks to heal. It is realistic in that sense. So when a player loses a couple of characters, they soon come to the idea that running is usually better than fighting. So for you new GMs out there, you new storytellers, you can't just drop in a random combat to spice things up. It has to be thought out, because if things are going a bit poorly, then you need to adjust your story. You can't just chuck in a combat, because it might end the game there and then. So guys, thanks for listening to my continuation of Call of Cthulhu. You know, there's nothing that makes me feel alive than a good horror. Nothing that really satisfies me like a great tale of terror. And we are so lucky to have a game that works so smoothly and so masterfully pulls at the strings of the deepest of human emotions. I always really enjoy it when I get to mix up the channel's content like this, so not always focusing on the same thing. So it's really, really liberating to get in a different game every once in a while. So if you like the content, if this is the kind of stuff that you want from me, then please let me know, because I will do more of it for you. If there are things that you want covered, then by all means feel free just to ask. I love hearing people's ideas, and I really want to do things that people want to listen to, that people want to watch. So if you've got ideas, by all means, I am open to suggestion. So guys, thanks again for listening. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, you can consider liking, commenting, or subscribing. And I will see you guys next time at the gaming table.